welcome to the interview section of the May meeting of Business Insights Online Networking. Pete is now going to introduce himself briefly and tell us a little bit more about what's going on in the interview this month. So over to you, Pete.
Fantastic. Thanks, Guy. Okay. So Pete Allison, I run Business Insights alongside a number of business shows across Southwest, Gloucestershire, South Gloucestershire, Somerset, and Bath and North East Somerset. Business Insights is our online version of things, and it's where we quite often continue discussions that have been happening live in person or prepare other discussions that have been happening live in person. We normally invite a couple of people in with some really interesting stories, and we continue to do that. But we are doing something a little bit different today because two of my colleagues who work with me across all the shows are already here on screen, and that is Gill Smith and Guy Timson. And for the last several shows, we've been developing a thread of thinking. Gill has, about networking, and that's indeed what we're all here doing. And quite often the show gets described as something great big 2-day networking event, which is one description that is valid of it. When it's live on the ground, it's got a thought leadership program, and there's plenty of opportunity to dip in and out of things that are being talked about. And there's an exhibition space, and you can go meander around and meet exhibitors and talk, and you can have a coffee with your friends in the corner, and it all runs over 2 days. But it raises the question of what is networking. We all live in networks. At the central part of our lives, we have our nuclear network of our families. We have an extended family. We have the street we live in. We have the town we live in. These are all networks, and the human being, by nature of what it is, lives in networks, usually on the whole. Clearly, things sometimes don't quite work out like that, but that is the norm. So when we talk about networking and we think about the business side of networking, we then turn to that and say, well, what is a business network and what's it all about? And the two extreme sort of ends of networking, which come out of what you want out of a piece of networking, that I tend to use as examples, would be the sort of BNI type sales process networking at one end, and then maybe the town chambers at the other, which are two really, really different and not mutually exclusive network styles. It's what you want out of them. So I know that both Gill and Guy are both very experienced serial networkers across all sorts of bits and pieces. Gill's been running this thread at the show, and I thought we'd have a great opportunity for this Business Insights interview to just explore a little bit of it with Gill and Guy and what they're thinking about this. So Gill, Guy, do you want to just introduce yourselves briefly in the context of what we're going to talk about here? And then we'll just run through a few questions and just see what you think. Gill, do you want to go first?
I'm Gill Smith from the Business Kitchen, and the Business Kitchen exists because of networking, actually. I was promoting some consultancy work within Gloucestershire in the data governance space, because that's part of my background, and was at a BNI meeting, and a guy called Nigel Nolman, who some of you will know, was also at the meeting, and he was promoting marketing consultancy, and we decided that actually we could probably do something jointly. And then at some point we decided to start running a training company called the Business Kitchen, and without the BNI meeting we wouldn't be here today.
Brilliant. Guy, where do you fit into the networking scene?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually, because I was in corporate for a long while where you'd network at certain things like golf days and stuff, but nothing organized or informal. And then I got out of corporate about 15 years ago and ran a business, still running it, in fact, Channel Force, which was heavily involved in, I guess, singular management of businesses with sectors and various different things like that. Just didn't need it then. Moved down to Somerset, started working at a place where we ran a telemarketing company, in fact, a telephone answering service called TelePA. And I just started networking, and I started with small groups because we used to run one in Wells, and then gradually branched out and have done various different things, kind of like with Bion, all around the world. Also, I do regularly, on a regular basis, things like Chamber, Business West, Somerset Chamber, Federation of Small Businesses. There's a very nice one, a vineyard just around the corner from us, which is run by 3 people I met networking anyway. So really, it's a case of, I guess, just going out and talking to people and listening to what they do, and then going from there.
Brilliant. And you raise a good point, because it's something we learned with Business Insights very quickly around the pandemic, in that, networking, quite apart from what you want, the outcomes of it, we acquired quite a number of international contacts just by this, what we're doing here. And actually that that would never have happened if we were relying on the ground network. So that whole dimension of online comes in as well. I'm going to ask you, as individuals, your experienced networkers, why do you do it, and what's your preferred networking style? Do you have a preferred networking style? No, I'm going to ask you first, but what's your thought about that?
Preferred networking style. I seem to be, unlike quite a few people, I don't have a fear of walking up to total strangers in a room. I was down at a big do down in Dorset last week, down near Dorchester, where half the people were from Somerset Chamber, half the people were Dorset Chamber, and I just walked up and went, hello, and just, did the bit like the Queen, bless her, at the garden party. And what do you do? That sort of thing. You just get talking, you just get asking. I find asking questions is a good way. It's not just going in and saying, oh, I do this. That's the last thing you want to do, because you haven't made a connection. There's a couple of tactics I use as well, where I can help to engage with people. I think they'll come on a further question as well, so I'll defer to Jill on that and keep my powder dry for the forthcoming questions.
Jill, over to you.
So I suppose there's several reasons for networking. I think, and probably the online things that we do through county business shows are slightly different from attending other people's networking. Because I think the county business shows, and I'm sure part of the reason that Guy's involved as well, is that it gives us visibility to a wider audience. Whereas if you go to an FSB networking meeting, which are great, and they do them in person and online, you are there as very much as an attendee rather than somebody who's front of house, front of room. And I think those are therefore two very different experiences, and therefore two very different types of objective. So when I network at this sort of thing, I'm trying to establish myself as an authority and an expert. Now, whether that works, I leave other people to judge. But when I'm an FSB one, it is as Guy says, it's actually I'm more likely to be asking questions of other people rather than me, because I don't think that's making connections in the room at all.
Yeah, sure. And certainly asking questions, finding out about what other people want is really important. And I once got, well, as you learn about these things, you learn how to sort of take an interest in somebody else and get them talking. Well, just once or twice, and I'm sure you've had the same thing, you suddenly find yourself talking about yourself, answering other people's questions, and that's the moment you say to yourself, I'm talking to someone who knows what they're doing here, and you have to start, and then it becomes a great game of chess. But that's another story altogether. So I mentioned a moment ago the sort of town chamber of commerce, the fairly laid back. I hesitate to say social. It has social elements to it, but obviously it is a business group and it's taking interest in what it's doing. But it tends to be a more relaxed environment. And then at the other end, just taking this example, BNI, but there are plenty of others for whom it's a much more accountable, aggressive. Again, I'm not comfortable using that word, but I'll use it so you know what I mean. It's you're committed to make referrals happen and do things. I'm interested what you think about those two, and actually, you'll have your feel about whether they're for you or not, but I'm interested in an objective sense about what you think about those two and how they sit beside each other. Jill, you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because Kitchen actually came about through BNI, which of course is probably one of the most formal and structured of all the networking groups. Would BNI really work for the business now? I'm not sure in quite the same way. I think the challenge with the different things is that you as an individual business owner, or if you're going, representing a business, you need to understand the ethos and the values of the networking group, because as you say, something like BNI is all about sharing, is all about referring business, and that can work very well, and it can work absolutely disastrously depending on whether it's done as a numbers game or whether it's done with integrity and some real thought. It's single seat. I'm not a great believer in worrying about competition. That's what Haddon was saying about how they stand out earlier. We shouldn't be worrying about competition. So the single seat tends to, I think, can be quite divisive in a way, again, if it's not handled in a really empathetic way. But you've got to understand what it is you are looking for from the meeting and what best fits your personality. And how you like to deal with people. I mean, the structure makes sure everybody gets equal airtime and all that, the more informal stuff. If somebody's very quiet, they may find that a little bit more intimidating and therefore not get as much out of it as, I can think of a couple of people that come to SCBN, they don't engage as much as some of the
South Cheltenham Business Network, which is the live one that Jill and I both partner on as well, on the ground in Cheltenham.
Some of the louder people like me and Louise,
Oh, would we ever say that? Would we ever say that? And for sure, I know people who use BNI as an exclusive marketing tool. So, and that saves time and energy, and that's where they commit it. Guy, what's your take on those two?
Well, I don't think there's two for a start. I think there's many, many different types of networking within the less formal side, but I think they're all quite formal because they all have a certain structure. I've been to 2 or 3 different BNI meetings. If I had a business that I thought was going to benefit dramatically from being at BNI, I would sign up for it like a shot, because I think it is incredibly worthwhile to thousands and thousands of businesses all over the world. I don't think there's any question. Proof is in the pudding. I got a mate who lives in Florida, who's a financial advisor. I grew up with him in Gosforth in Newcastle. He moved over there with his family, and he has been in the BNI chapter over there for over 20 years, still gets the vast majority of his work from it, would be destitute probably without it. Yeah. Regardless of their system of single seat or the referral side of things, it works for some businesses, it doesn't work for others, pure and simple. Which is why I haven't done it for things like Channel Force. For a lot of the others, I take the view that they aren't all lumped under the same roof because they're all very different. I learned very early on that you got quite a different, until recently, you got quite a different type of attendee at the FSB breakfasts as you did to the Business West breakfasts. FSB breakfasts, Federation of Small Businesses, that is, were for a long time virtually solely sole traders or two-man bands, and it's really expanded quite a bit recently on that of the people who come to breakfasts. Business West, you had a real mixture. I was a member of a group called We Mean Biz, which was part of Women Mean Biz. That was fine, apart from the fact it was the same 12 people every month. So you built up connections with them. From what I'd say on each of them, and I don't want to be overstepping for any of the other questions, what I'd say for each of them, if you're not sure, then go. Yeah, if you're not sure, then attend. Attend 1 or 2, apply the same rules that we'll be covering off in a bit to all the meetings, and plot it. Actually make a record of what you've done and everything that it's led to. And then you can do your analysis and you can decide which ones work and which ones don't.
Brilliant. And that really creates a neat segue into my next question, which probably is part of the plan anyway. So where I go from here is to say, okay, so when you're about to go out to networking, you're preparing, how do you prepare, and how do you know what outcomes you're after? Because obviously your metrics that you've just referred to, you need to understand what the outcome is that you're looking in order to be able to cover that metric off properly. So what's your preparation style and what are the outcomes you're looking for? Again, Guy, do you want to pick up and run with that one? And then we'll see what
Sure. Preparation style, know my pitch, inside out. back to front so that I can hop about. I mean, obviously I've got three things, but I usually won't go and pitch more than one at any one particular meeting. You get to be honest, the CAS-strap side is something that I wouldn't pitch anyway. So, but I'm usually pitching a combination of county business shows and channel forks. Okay, so know my pitch. Secondly, I do a couple of other different things as well. If I'm going to a breakfast meeting, I'll listen to Radio 4 on the drive. So I'll pick up on news stories so that there's a level of engagement there that you can talk about, so that you know what's going on in the world in the last few hours, so that you're not just, there's another thing I do, which is really silly, which is similar jacket in the room. You know, I know it sounds daft, but if you could just sidle up to someone and say, oh, nice jacket. I had it down in Dorset the other week. When I had this blue check jacket on, the bloke said, oh, nice jacket. I said, yours too. And you've instantly got a connection there. You know the football scores, that sort of thing. Possibly know what's going on in the local area that you're going to. Just certain little things where it's not just going, oh, and what do you do? You know, which is a fallback, but you want to engage on other sides as well.
Brilliant.
As far as outcomes that I'm looking for, well, they're really driven by the questions that you're asking, you know, and who you think might be the people that you want to follow up with afterwards. But we'll get onto that in a bit.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think outcomes for me as well is a little bit of knowing whether you're looking for direct numeric sales outcomes or whether actually it's just relational and background stuff. And that can be a different thing for a different show and a different networking event all over the place. Jill, what's your take? How do you prepare? What are your outcomes?
Like guys, knowing what it is you want to say, but I mean, again, depending on the networking meeting and whether you get a list of attendees beforehand or not, then if you do, then I would do some research on the attendees. So I'm familiar potentially with their websites, maybe have a quick look at their social media posts, because that would be a starting point for a conversation with them potentially. In terms of measures, I think one of the challenges with measuring outcomes of networking is, I mean, one of the kitchen members does tons of networking. In fact, at one point he was doing 28 hours a week, and we recognised that probably that was not terribly useful in terms of growing his business. But if the outcome is the social support and the community and the tribe pieces, then that's whether you come away with a feeling good factor, I guess. For the other, in terms of, at the end of the day, we network because we want to eventually get business from people. You've got to be a bit careful you don't measure too soon, because if it's relational business, then it might not pop up for a year after you've had the conversation at the meeting. So for me, it's an idea of getting probably one or two one-to-ones out of the people that are there.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, that balance of motivational actually comes into mental health in the end as well. And actually, if you're feeling really rubbish and you go and nobody's interested in what you're doing, or you get some person who gives, you can be in a really bad place. Flip side of coin, actually, we are social human beings, and actually, if you're in a tricky place, to just cut out and do something completely different, have a couple of constructive conversations, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is, as you walk into the room, is consciously raising your energy level, because if you are, if you're not feeling great, you don't want to be walking in like a wet rag, because then nobody will want to talk to you, and probably understandably so. So you may need to, stand up straight and take a deep breath and say, right, here we go, so.
But also not losing sight of your actual outcomes, because if one of your outcomes is getting a couple of good leads in a very simple thing that you're selling, then you need to not lose sight of that as well. Sorry, Guy, I cut across you there, Guy.
No. All I'd say to that is, if you're not feeling great, and we saw it a lot in COVID, where you had screens full of 15 or 20 people, and you could tell that there were 2 or 3 on the screen every single time who were just zoned out, who were not in a good place and weren't really contributing, weren't really going for it. If you're just listening, you get more sometimes when you're listening than when you're trying to put stuff across, because it can just be that you're listening and you're thinking, right, I'm not going to put anything in the chat, but I'll find them on LinkedIn and say, it was interesting what you said, because people attach more relevance to something that you've actually listened to that they've said than you potentially trying to get your point across. Because let's face it, when we're doing the 1 minute round, and everyone does this, when you're waiting to do your 1 minute round, you are half as receptive as after you've done your 1 minute round, because you're thinking about what you're going to say. Yeah, which is why if you really know your pitch, you can leave that, you can park that, and you can listen to absolutely everybody else and what they say. And then when it comes to you doing your 1 minute round, you know, especially if you're going around a table, or maybe if you're last on the table, really listen, because then there are two or three related things that you can do. And you can say, interesting that you said that, and you can relate something to that, and you can relate something to that, and you can relate something to that. By doing that, you've engaged everyone at the table because they know you've listened to everything that they've said.
Yeah, good. No, I agree. So I think we might have covered elements of this, but so we'll see how this goes and what you want to say about it. But okay, so you've had your networking event. When you walk away, what makes a successful networking event? Guy, you follow on and go with that.
A successful networking event for me is a live lunch one where they didn't serve chicken.
Mental
Or anything but chicken. All right. No, to be honest, a successful networking event is the parameters are absolutely endless. Okay. It could be just one little bit of information that you've picked up, because quite often people will say stuff right at the outset. Like there was like, for instance, Jackie, with you want to reach accountants. Yeah. I can help with that with Channel Force. Jane knows I can help with that with Channel Force because I've done it for payroll and HR and everything for Jane. So we can talk about that last little bit there that you said. It was literally the last sentence you said. These are the people I want to do business with, that sort of thing. Yeah. So that could be my main takeaway today, because, you know, there will be other takeaways as well. But it could just be that sort of thing. So for me, it's always being on the lookout for that one little thing or two little things. And then, as Jill said, and I don't want to steal her thunder as well, but, you know, possibly getting a one-to-one or maybe a couple of one-to-ones over the coming weeks. They don't have to be tomorrow or the next day because we're not BNI. You know, just doing that.
Brilliant. And I get that. And I think, again, for my money, it's something more a case of what I find happens as much as a target or expectation. But I tend to find that, you know, you walk away with 3 useful points of contact. And that can be anything from just a thought-provoking initial, oh yeah, okay, moment, through to somebody saying, okay, we can do something together here. Let's follow up on that through anything else. But I tend to find, on the whole, you walk away, you know, with 3 good contacts. If you walk away without having had any good conversation, you have to question either where you were at or whether that was the right piece of networking for you. If you try, or if you find that it gets much more than that, you end up burdening yourself down with follow-up and stuff that you're never going to do properly. So that's my take. But Jill, what's your take on all that?
I would agree with that, actually. And I think the other thing, I mean, again, I think if where it's, you know, South Cheltenham, where it's live and we're running the event, then whether that's a successful outcome is, for me, is how many people are still, you know, still standing around chatting 15 minutes after the event has left, and then they come back another month. So, you know, I think that's a measure for that one. I think for the ones that I attend as a pure attendee, then it is a bit of a case of, did I get out of it what I planned? And if I didn't, coming back to your question, was that because it was where I was at as opposed to the meeting? Because maybe, you know, I wasn't terribly engaged for whatever reason. But I think it's just sometimes I would measure it on my energy levels. If I come away with my energy levels high, then it's been a successful meeting. If I come away thinking, God, that was a waste of time, yeah, it wasn't a successful meeting.
That's a really good take on it. Brilliant. Okay, so let's just change a slight bit of direction. Fascinating discussion that I have on a regular basis with people, and that's online versus in person. Now there was some research out of the University of Berkeley in California, which looked at how people monitor when we meet in person. The body language is very significant. Then the tonality we use is the next significant thing, and then the actual words, the language we use is the lesser of the 3. And when it goes online, it 100% reverses, because of course you lose the body language. The tonality you can pick up on and matters, but it's actually the words people use are much more in your face. So there's certain amounts of science about how it acts differently, and then of course you also look at the aspects of, as I said earlier, the international side we could never have in person, not in the same way. But what's your view? Again, I'll let Jill start here. What's your view of online versus in person? Not as a mutually exclusive thing, but how do you see them together?
I think they fit well together actually. I think one of the decisions you make is what your mix is going to be. I mean, I know people that don't really want to do the online at all. They'd rather do all their in person, and people the other way around. I think they're a bit horses for courses, really. I mean, the advantage of the online is I had to travel, 10 yards from the kitchen to my desk to go to this meeting. Whereas when I come up for South Cheltenham, I'm traveling a long way. I'm leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning to be there for 7:30. So, but it's a different vibe in the room. I think you get a different energy in the room. I think that the challenge with online is you don't get the casual conversations that you get in person when people are arriving, when people are leaving, while they're waiting to get their coffee. It's those pieces you lose. And I haven't seen an online that's worked out a way of replicating that informal part of the meeting.
Certainly there's an efficiency, as you mentioned there, about being online. But I will never forget. Obviously, we all learned a lot about meeting online over COVID, as you do. And then when COVID started to unlock, we all started meeting again. And there's somebody who I got to know online through networking and what have you. They were here in Cheltenham, and we met for the first time in person after COVID. And you had that moment that we all had at that point. Oh, hello, you're taller than you were. I thought you were all that kind of game. And actually, during that meeting in person, although we'd met endless times over a couple of years online, there was a collaborative moment, and that actually actually, do you know that we could do that? And you think, what is it? Why did we not get to that moment when you're online? So there's efficiency versus that interpersonal, which I think is a balance, and you get mental health versus being out there and seeing people. Guy, what's your take on this?
Was there online networking before COVID?
I think there was, but it wasn't particularly well known about.
Not very much. Not very much.
Certainly not.
All.
Certainly not very much.
Yeah. I think one of the big differences, yes, there is the time element. There's the vast time element. It's being able to project yourself in the same way online as you can face to face. Well, it's not face to face, it's actually in person, because online networking is actually face to face networking. It's just in the first in-person networking I went to after COVID, I almost felt I was going to carry a little box in that lit up green when I spoke, because it would have been a bit quirky, would have been a bit zany. But the thing is, one of the things to watch out for with in-person networking is that, as an example, I'm 6 foot tall. I stand up straight. I'm always dressed in roughly the same way, with a jacket and a tie and potentially a waistcoat, things like that. So I'm comfortable with that, and I'm comfortable with everything there. A lot of people that you talk to aren't potentially as comfortable. A lot of people that you talk to are, a few inches smaller than you. Some are a few inches taller than you as well. So there is this thing, as you say, Pete, oh, you're taller than I thought you'd be, or you never say you're shorter than I thought you'd be, or anything like that. But you're tall guy. So it's always be wary when you're walking into a room of the positive or potentially negative effect that your appearance and your mannerisms can have on other people.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a certain amount you can get away with online. Yeah, like turning up in PJ bottoms and, you've just walked through and just slung a shirt on and things like that. And I think, it's difficult to describe it, but I've seen occasions where I've seen people recently in online networking almost take a step back if people are walking towards them. It's this thing that you can't do online, but in person you just have to be a bit wary of.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you, and they are very different, and we all find our different ways in doing that. So look, we're conscious a bit about time here, and I want to combine just a couple of last questions to really wrap this up, and maybe invite anybody who wants to have uh, put their own angle on it. What do you do when you leave a meeting? What do what's your follow up after that? And do you have any advice for anyone? If someone was saying to you, "Hey, I'm first time networking," help! What would your couple of moments of advice be? Sorry, I'll do that. Guy, do you want to just carry on with that?
Yeah, sure. The first thing I don't do is get back to my office and contact every single person on the list via LinkedIn. That's the first thing I do not do. It's an absolute no-no for me. I've got three basic strains. People I've talked to, people on the list who I think there might be some synergy with, and the rest. Okay? The rest will stay within the lists. I may put some of them on HubSpot if I think that I'm going to reach out to them in a month or two, but I will not blanket respond to people that I haven't met. It's the same as being in a room with someone, seeing them over there, not being able to say hello, and then just going straight on and linking with them. I just think it's just something I don't do. Now, some people might, but it's just something I don't do. Yeah. And the other thing I do is I just have a mental tick through and think, right, did I do that? Did I do that? Who am I going to follow up with? So I've got a list. Yeah.
Brilliant. Jill, what's your take on that?
Well, because usually what I end up doing, and I know there's quite a few people that do networking that end up doing this, is I usually am joining the dots for people. So the first thing I usually do is make sure that if I've said I'm going to introduce them to somebody, I get the introduction email out, because otherwise it gets forgotten, and also it just seems more courteous. You said you would do it, so go do it. And then, for people that I've talked to, I will have a look on LinkedIn and potentially send them a message to connect. And then go and lie in a darkened room, really.
Very good, very good. Now listen, on that note, Haddon had his hand up a second ago, so we will come to Haddon in next, but also I'm quite sure I'd love to hear Jane's thinking on this as well, because I know Jane's both a serial networker and she does a little bit with work with us around emotional intelligence and things as well. So I'm gonna solicit Jane's thoughts in a second. But Haddon, before I go to Jane, your hand was up. Do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I wanted to say something from a different angle. I understand potentially as a creative that I see things sometimes differently than others. I've got a wide range of networking experience over the years. Everything from when it first started, we'd sit around stuffy and have a stuffy meal and generally be quite stuffy with each other. And it was all very, I don't know, so let's call it classic just to be complementary to it, Chamber of Commerce dinners, things of this nature. I can remember expanding my network as well as my waistline. And then years later, getting into the online stuff and really enjoying that. But they all seem to have a different formula. They all seem to have a different way of working, and they all have different success rates. I went to one in the Glos area at the uni. I was massively impressed with that. I had to actually shout to be heard at the table, and everybody else then was, of course, shouting as well. It was a very busy room, and you had to change tables. So there were lots of rules in place, but the rules weren't too much. The rules actually made things flow, and everybody got heard, and everybody got to mix. I thought that was amazing. Where it's Zoom based, I tend to find that higher numbers work because then you've got that in your favor. But also Zoom-based meetings sometimes seem to be where there's a repetition of trades or craft and people doing the same thing. So controversially, I would like to say that having been in BNI for an 11-month stint before I had to leave due to ill health in the 12th month, what I would say that remains with me, that was the best thing that BNI has got in its favor. And I had a lot of work at that time, so I'm not being disparaging about it, was the fact that it was very much focused on one trade. One seat, I think was the phrase, if I remember rightly. And I personally would say, hey, if I was going to have some fun and invent networking, I would put that as a foundation to start with. I can remember going to a 4N meeting in a hotel, and I had thanks. I had 3 web designers around me, and one of them, and that could have worked. You know, it's too many. It's too many. Of course it is, but it could have worked. But one of them said, "Well, I do websites under £250," before he'd even found out what size that website might be in his pitch. How do you sit next to that? How do you deal with that? You know, so for me, it would have to be a one-trade situation. I don't mind if it's online or if it's face-to-face. They all have the different nuances and differences. But another way, another twist, which I'm getting involved with tomorrow, is networking, but where you have the idea that you've got a surgery, obviously not a real surgery, and that you're actually not only the only seat representing what you do, but you're also an expert in it. That's not patting myself on the back, but I've been trying to be an expert for a couple of decades now. And I'd like to sort of let you know how that goes in the future. The idea that there's a series of experts only who are in, also obviously in a solo seat as well. Some markets are more competitive than others. Other people have managed to find a niche, which from a marketing perspective, I always enjoy. So I would like to sort of put that out there, that the idea of it should be one person, doesn't matter if it's online or face-to-face, but it should be, sorry, not one person, but a single seat. And even the idea that in that seat is an expert, because one of the dangers in, I'll be quiet now, don't worry. One of the dangers I found in the B word, as I used to call it, would be that they may have got one seat, but they might not be an expert.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, very much so.
And Pete, can I just jump in and respond to one thing that Haven said?
Yeah.
About the guy that he's sitting next to, who's a web designer, who says, I do websites for £250. My response is what I term the Stella Artois response. I just go to everyone, and if anyone wants to know why I don't do websites for £250, here's my card.
Yeah, yeah. No, good. Keep people thinking, keep people challenging. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm really conscious of time, but Jane, I am absolutely fascinated, just purely from a personal perspective, to hear your take on this, because I know, I mean, obviously you work in a world of emotional intelligence and why people do things, and you know, and that is at the end, at one level, what networking is all about. So, you know, in short form or not necessarily totally long form, but whatever. What's your take on the last half hour or so's dialogue?
As you know, and you called me a serial networker, but I've experienced lots of different types. I was a BNI member. I'm doing Chamber of Commerce. I'm the co-working space that I have has its own networking. But I think, as Jill said, going into it and knowing who you need to talk to if you can is really, really important, because that gives you confidence. If you can go and say to somebody, oh, I've been reading about you online and I need to talk to you about this because I think it will be useful for your customers. You've got a great opening start, as Guy says, go in, you know, ready to chat. But I think it was something Haddon said, and I think it was really important. And what he said was the networking where you are the expert and running a surgery. Because it's very, if you are skilled at something, you have more to give than if you are not overly skilled at it, if you know what I mean. So the person who is more generalist may struggle to get people attracted because they're covering so much. A skilled person can narrow it down. On the other hand, if you are too skilled, you become unsuccessful because people cannot recognize what you do and share it.
So, yeah, that's important as well.
Can I just ask a question there?
Of course you can.
Who determines whether you're an expert or not? That's what I want to know, because in your mind, I mean, obviously we're a specialist payroll bureau.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that, but you don't know that unless you work with me.
Great question.
Exactly. And it's about what the people around you talk about you. It's how when you're in that room, everybody discusses you and your brand.
Nobody.
I would just jump in quickly there, and and answer that, if I may. So it's not just the one thing, though, is it? So one of my jobs, and I think of it as a job for any brief, is to make that person, make that business, make that not-for-profit look bigger or more successful than it already is. That's it. It's got to always, everything has got to be as professional as possible. And when you're in your business, you forget things. For instance, my wonky front gate as a carpenter, as a good example, might be he might be even a joiner. You're guaranteed his gate's going to be falling off its hinges when you see it, because you can't be on top of everything. Much as you want to be, you believe you can. So everything has got to be as professional as possible. Everything needs to be raised up. But in terms of, what really is an expert, if they haven't got a good portfolio, can I take them sensibly? If I was going to have someone build a house for me, I would have testimonials. I would want to, not just testimonials on Google, but I would actually say, hey, can I speak with someone? Would you mind? The last person you worked with, the last person who built an extension. I'm just using that as an example. You could do the same with the website. You could maybe do the same with your businesses as well. I think there are ways to prove you're an expert without, yes, we've done everything with the brand. Yes, I've got 50 Google reviews, which I have. That doesn't mean anything. Ring up an ex-customer every time. You'll find out the goods of people, whether or not they really are an expert or just a self-appointed one.
Guy, did you want to put in a last comment then?
Yeah, sure. Nobody walked into any business meeting or any networking meeting ever, and as the start of their 1 minute round said, well, I'm sort of okay at what I do. Yeah.
They do, actually.
Unless they were unless they were the chair of the National Apathy Party or something like that. Nobody ever did that. If you're going to say something, you've got to back it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go back to initial sales, DIPIDA, the P in DIPIDA is prove. You have to prove what you can do.
And God, but you only have 60 seconds to do that.
Yeah. Well, you don't actually, Jackie, because I managed to be able to prove what I can do with Channel Force about half an hour after my 1 minute round during this, by alluding to you about the fact that I could find accountants for you and saying, oh, and by the way, I found people in HR for Jane. So you don't actually have to do it in your 1 minute round necessarily. You just keep listening.
Yeah, but that's about your ability to introduce people to other people within the group.
Yeah.
That doesn't justify what your speciality is. That means that you're happy to help the people that are in the networking group.
Totally.
Because I do that all the time. I'm always looking at part of why I do networking is because I want to be able to help other people, because I've got a massive portfolio of connections that I can introduce people to, and I do that all the time. But that doesn't mean that proves that I'm a specialist at payroll.
No. So we're going to have to wrap this here. Oh, I've got everybody lining up.
Oh,
right.
sorry, just
Guy,
one
very
thing
quickly.
back to that,
One sentence,
Jackie.
Guy.
Just one thing back to that, Jackie. I know a guy who only reads testimonials when he's networking.
Brilliant. One sentence from Jane. You were about to say something?
I was just about to say, the people you meet and the people that you do one-to-ones with will be the people that you like, grow, trust. And those people will tell people about your skills and competence.
And my one input to that one, last one also was going to be, while identifying an expert is important, don't never forget that the person who is being very, is presenting them over, is building a sales and a confidence pitch. Don't ever miss the quiet person in the corner who sometimes is the best expert of all and doesn't need to push it too hard just because they're good at what they do. But that's a really subtle angle to it. Listen, that's been a really fascinating discussion and quite eye-opening in a number of ways. I hope it was useful to you guys. I think at that point, I'm going to say, Guy,